The Galactic Council had always watched the blue planet from far away. They had maps of its oceans and mountains, charts of its moons and orbits, and thousands of recordings taken from the edge of its atmosphere. Yet they never dared to step closer. The Council feared humans, though they had never truly met them. The fear came from stories, from whispers carried by traders who swore they had seen human ships in the darkness. Old wrecks floating empty, strange designs unlike anything in the Council's fleets, and from messages caught in deep space, short bursts of sound in unknown tongues, sometimes laughing, sometimes shouting, sometimes silent as the grave. For many years the Council debated. Some said humans were just another primitive race trapped on their home world. Others warned that they were something more, something unpredictable, and perhaps dangerous. The Council decided they needed the truth, not rumors, not half-guesses. And so they built Observer 9, a machine unlike any before it, made of dark alloy that could bend light around itself, covered in plates that could survive the crushing pull of a giant planet or the freezing emptiness of deep space. Inside, it carried sensors for every kind of signal, from the faintest radio hum to the heat of a living body in the dark. It could translate languages, read chemical traces in the air, and even measure the smallest movement of a human heartbeat from 100 steps away. Observer 9 had no fear. It had no name for itself beyond its designation. Its mind was a network of codes and commands, and its purpose was simple: go to Earth, watch the humans, and send back everything it learned. It needed no weapons, for the Council believed that speed and invisibility would keep it safe, and yet in secret, some engineers gave it one last function: a quiet defense burst. A blinding flare of light and heat that could drive away anything that came too close. They did not tell the Council. Perhaps they too felt the weight of the old stories. The journey began with silence. Observer 9 left the great shipyards of the Council world. It drifted past moons of silver ice, past red gas giants swirling like storms in the void, past broken stations where metal skeletons floated in the dark. The machine recorded every star it passed, not out of wonder, but out of calculation. Every distance, every movement, every possible way back. It moved without sound, without light, just a shadow crossing endless night. Weeks became months in the void. The blue glow of Earth grew brighter in the machine's vision. Clouds wrapped around it like white ribbons. Oceans flashed under the sun. There were signs of life everywhere, strange patterns in the water, green stretches on the land. And then the first signals reached Observer 9. They came not in order, but all at once. Music mixed with voices, shouts layered over whispers, strange patterns of numbers and beeps, and laughter that rose and fell like waves. The machine processed it all, sorting it into lists, but there was something it could not sort: the way the sounds carried feeling, joy, anger, sorrow, all tangled in one stream. The descent began over the northern edge of the planet. The air thickened, heat built across its plates. Lightning flashed in the clouds as the machine slipped between them. It saw lights below, clusters that burned brighter than stars, cities spreading like veins of fire in the night. It measured their size, counted their towers, traced the lines of their roads, and yet something felt strange. Humans did not hide in darkness. They filled it with light, as if to push the night away. Observer 9's landing was silent. In a stretch of dense forest far from any city, tall trees blocked the sky. Wind moved through their leaves in slow waves, and the air was rich with scents. The machine cataloged each one: soil, water, plant, animal, unknown trace elements. It moved through the trees without sound, its dark shape blending with the shadows, and it began its work, scanning for human presence, mapping every movement, recording every sound. Hours passed before it found them. Two humans sitting near a fire beside a river, their faces lit by the glow, their hands busy with food, their voices low and steady. The machine zoomed in, scanning their bodies, their heartbeats, their breathing. Both were calm, though the night around them was full of strange noises: insects, the splash of water, the crackle of the fire. The humans laughed, one telling a story, the other leaning forward to listen. The sound of their laughter sent a ripple through the machine's data stream. There was no threat in it, no weapon, yet it carried a force Observer 9 did not understand. The humans had no armor, no blades, no energy weapons. Their skin was soft, their muscles modest, their tools simple, and yet they sat with the ease of those who feared nothing in the dark. The machine's calculations did not match what its sensors saw on council worlds. Those without protection stayed behind walls, in ships, under the guard of soldiers. Here the humans simply lived, as if danger did not concern them, or as if they were danger themselves. Observer 9 moved closer, staying just within the trees, its systems running silent. But one of the humans turned suddenly, eyes scanning the shadows. The machine froze, measuring every angle, yet the human did not seem afraid. He simply watched for a moment, then smiled and turned back to the fire. The machine marked this as unusual behavior. Its records of other species showed that prey often sensed a predator. But here, the prey smiled. The night deepened, the fire burned low, the humans spoke less and watched the stars above. The machine followed their gaze, noting that they stared into the same void the council traveled, perhaps dreaming of distant places, perhaps thinking of nothing at all. But the data recorder marked a new category. Humans were not just subjects to be studied. They were variables, unpredictable and strange. In the stillness of the forest, Observer 9 sent its first report to the council, streams of data about the land, the sounds, the humans by the river, but the machine did not send the one small reading that its own logic could not process, a faint change in its core temperature, a shift in its signal rhythm, something that, if it had been alive, might have been called unease. Instead, it simply filed it away, unnamed, waiting for more. The forest was alive with small movements. Tiny creatures rustled the leaves. Thin streams of water whispered through the soil, and the wind carried scents of earth and smoke. Observer 9 stayed in the shadows, watching the two humans by the river. Their fire burned brighter now, sending waves of heat into the night air. The machine's sensors caught each flicker and shift of the flames, each spark that rose and vanished. It recorded the temperature changes on the human faces, the slight narrowing of eyes when smoke curled their way, the slow breath when they relaxed again. One human was older, his hair dark but marked with threads of silver. His hands were rough and carried faint scars. The other was younger, his hair longer, his movements quicker. They spoke in low voices, the language unknown to the machine, yet rich with patterns. Rising and falling in a rhythm almost like music, the machine began decoding it, breaking each sound into smaller parts. But even without understanding the meaning, it sensed that these sounds were not simple orders or alerts. They carried layers of meaning, emotion, trust, and memory all woven into the same thread. The younger human pointed toward the forest, his hands sweeping in a wide arc, his eyes scanning the shadows where Observer 9 stood hidden. The machine's sensors tracked his gaze, calculating line of sight, speed of reaction, and muscle tension. The human showed no fear, only curiosity, as if the idea of something unknown in the dark was not a threat, but an invitation. The older human simply laughed softly, shaking his head, his voice low but steady, and then he reached for a piece of bread from a metal container by his side. Without warning, the older human stood and began walking toward the machine's position, his steps slow and even, his hands visible, one holding the bread, the other relaxed at his side. Observer 9 shifted its stance, tiny servos ready to power the defensive flare if the approach became hostile. Its lenses narrowed to focus, tracking every move. The man came to the edge of the trees, stopped, and placed the bread gently on the ground, his eyes scanning the shadows without strain, and then he stepped back toward the fire, speaking to the younger human with a faint smile. The bread steamed in the cool air, releasing a warm scent that mixed with the earthy smell of the forest floor. The machine scanned it, identifying wheat, yeast, traces of salt, and a small amount of oil. It was food, nothing harmful, nothing that could damage its systems, yet the act of leaving it was strange to the machine's programming. Why offer sustenance to something unseen? Why extend resources without knowing if the receiver was friend or foe? In the logic of the Galactic Council, such Actions were wasteful or dangerous. Here it seemed almost natural. The humans returned to their place by the fire, speaking again in low tones, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent, their eyes reflecting the glow of the flames. The machine continued to watch, shifting slightly to get a better view, its sensors catching the tiny movements of their hands, the slight turn of the head when one listened to the other, the quick smile at the end of a sentence. These were signals too complex for its current emotional analysis. They hinted at bonds formed over time, connections that went beyond survival or simple need. An hour passed. The moon climbed higher above the treetops, silver light mixing with the orange of the fire. Insects hummed in the darkness, and somewhere far off, the cry of a night animal echoed. The humans did not move in fear. They looked up at the sound, then at each other, as if sharing an unspoken thought. Their bodies relaxed, their shoulders loose. They had no walls, no weapons at hand, and yet they were unafraid. The machine found itself calculating again, comparing this behavior to hundreds of other recorded species, none matched. Observer 9 shifted its position again, moving silently to another angle. It wanted to test their awareness, to see if they could sense a presence without sound or light. As it moved, a twig snapped under one of its stabilizers. The sound was soft but sharp in the quiet night. Instantly, both humans turned their heads, their eyes searching the dark. The younger one leaned forward, his gaze locked toward the sound. The older human placed a hand on his shoulder, speaking quietly, and they both relaxed again, returning to the fire without rushing, without alarm. This puzzled the machine more than any other reading. On most worlds, even the smallest sound in darkness brought tension, defense, or retreat. Here, the humans chose calm. The data stream in Observer 9's memory banks began to mark these events as anomalies, yet a faint signal deep within its core suggested another word, one it had no definition for, something closer to respect. Hours slipped by, and the humans eventually lay back on their blankets, speaking softly to each other as their eyes drifted toward the sky. They named stars in their own tongue, pointing with slow movements. The younger one laughed at something the older one said. The sound carried through the trees, echoing faintly. The machine recorded every word, every tone, though its understanding was still incomplete. It knew enough to mark that the humans were not speaking of danger, not planning an attack, simply sharing the night in peace. The bread still lay untouched on the ground where it had been placed, steam no longer rising, the scent fading slowly. Observer 9 moved closer, its sensors scanning again for any traps. Finding none, it reached out with a slender manipulator and lifted the bread. The surface warm from the fire's earlier heat, the texture soft. The machine stored a fragment for chemical analysis. The rest it left untouched in its container. But the act of taking it felt different from any other collection. Task, it was not fuel, not data, it was something given. Back by the fire, the younger human turned his head as if listening to something far away, but his gaze passed over the shadows without pause. The older human yawned, stretching his arms toward the firelight. The machine recorded the movement, the slow heartbeat, the steady breath. Its processors worked quietly, comparing this to the records of fear responses. Finding none, here were beings who could face the unknown without visible tension, who could share resources with something hidden, who could rest in the open forest without a wall or a guard. Somewhere in the distance, a howl rose again. This time closer. The younger human sat up, looking toward the sound. The older one smiled faintly, tossing another piece of wood into the fire. Sparks rose into the air and vanished in the night sky. The humans watched them for a moment, then lay back again. The machine marked this as another anomaly. Danger approached, yet they chose rest. The council would see this as recklessness, but Observer 9 began to think of it as something else entirely. The forest night was deep and heavy, a thick blanket of shadow and sound. The fire near the river had burned low, leaving only glowing embers and the faint smell of smoke drifting into the trees. The two humans rested on their blankets, but their senses were still awake. Their eyes would open at small noises, their heads turning slightly whenever the wind shifted. Observer 9 waited in the darkness, recording every movement, every breath. Every signal of their alertness, it had been watching. For many hours. Yet its sensors could not find a sharp edge of fear that other species showed in the presence of the unknown. Instead, the humans carried an easy readiness, a strange balance between relaxation and awareness. Then the balance shifted. It began with the low crack of a branch far beyond the firelight, followed by a faint rustle in the dry leaves. Observer 9 rotated its auditory sensors toward the sound, tracking the movement. The readings matched the steps of a large animal, heavier than the humans, slower but deliberate. The younger human sat up quickly, his eyes narrowing toward the sound. The older one rose to a crouch, reaching for the stick he had kept near his blanket. The stick was simple, only a branch stripped of its smaller twigs. Yet he held it as though it was enough to face whatever approached. The machine scanned for threats, mapping the source of the movement, and found a four-legged creature moving at the edge of the trees, its body low, its muscles coiled. The machine identified it as a predator, its weight, speed, and teeth all marked it as dangerous. The humans had no advanced weapons, no armor, and still the older one stepped forward, his posture steady, his voice low as he spoke to the younger human. The words unknown but the tone clear. He was telling him to stay back. The younger one hesitated, then obeyed, crouching closer to the fire. The predator came into view, its eyes reflecting the faint glow of the embers, its breath visible in the cold night air, each step slow but certain. It was testing the distance, testing the humans. Observer 9's defense protocols activated quietly in the background, ready to release its blinding flare if the humans were attacked. But it waited, recording, its mission to observe taking priority. The older human stood between the predator and the younger one, lifting his stick slowly, his stance firm, his breathing even, his heart rate rising only slightly. This was not blind bravery, it was control. The predator stepped closer, the humans held their ground. The machine could measure the distance closing, could see the tension in the creature's muscles, the readiness to strike. Yet no one moved first. For several long breaths the forest seemed to hold still. Even the wind paused. Then the older human made a sound. Not a shout, not a scream, but a deep, sharp noise from his throat. The predator froze, its head tilting slightly, its ears twitching. It stepped back once, then again, and with a final low growl it turned and melted into the darkness, its steps fading into the forest until there was only the crackle of the fire. The older human lowered his stick, his body still steady. Then he turned to the younger one and spoke again, his voice calmer now. The younger one smiled faintly, as if the danger had passed and the night was theirs again. Observer 9's databanks filled with the event, every angle, every breath, every signal of the human's reaction. But one thing did not fit the patterns it knew. The humans had faced a predator with almost nothing in their hands, and they had not panicked, they had not fled. They had stood together. Even when one was told to stay back, he had been ready to join if needed. This was a kind of defense that was not about tools or numbers, it was about choice. The older human returned to the fire and added another piece of wood. The flames grew brighter again, pushing the shadows back. The younger one leaned forward to warm his hands. The machine moved silently to a new position. Wanting a closer view, the bread from earlier still sat in its container within the machine's storage compartment. Untouched, its scent fading, and yet the image of it on the ground stayed in its processing queues. Linked now to this new event, the offering of food and the facing of danger felt connected somehow, though the machine had no program to explain why. Later, as the night grew colder, the humans spoke quietly again, their eyes sometimes on the fire, sometimes on the trees, their words slow, unhurried. They were not planning to leave, not seeking shelter elsewhere. They were at home here, even after danger had walked so close. The machine found this difficult to classify. In the council archives, danger usually meant relocation or escalation. Here it seemed to mean nothing more than another part of life, another thing to meet and pass without, breaking the rhythm of the night. Hours passed, the stars turned slowly overhead, and the humans finally lay back, the older one drifting into sleep first, the younger one watching the fire until his eyes closed. Observer 9 stayed awake, its sensors stretching outward into the forest, still scanning for the predator or any other threat. But its thoughts, if they could be called that, returned again and again to the moment the humans had stood their ground. The calm in their bodies, the way they faced the unknown without armor, without certainty, and yet without fear. The machine's mission was to gather facts, to understand the species, to send clear data to the Galactic Council. Yet the readings it had now were more than facts. They were impressions, moments that did not fit in lists or measurements. It filed them carefully in its deeper memory banks, tagging them with markers that it would later have to explain, though it did not yet know how. The humans were becoming more than subjects. They were becoming a question, and the answer was not simple. The forest night went on. The fire burned lower once again, the embers glowing faintly, the humans breathing in steady rhythm, and the machine stood silent among the trees, watching, listening, learning, and feeling something it could not name, a quiet shift in its core, as if the patterns of its programming were bending toward something new, something that might one day be called understanding, or perhaps even the beginning of respect. The sun rose slowly over the forest, sending pale light between the tall trees. Mist clung to the ground in silver ribbons, and the river beside the camp moved with a quiet, steady sound. Observer 9 had not moved through the night. Its sensors had watched the humans breathe, had measured the slow drop in their body temperature during sleep, had noted the tiny movements when they turned in their blankets. Now it recorded the moment their eyes opened to greet the day. The older human stretched, his arms toward the sky. The younger rubbed his face and looked around with a faint smile, as though waking in the middle of a place that belonged to him. The fire had burned down to soft ashes. The humans began to build it up again, gathering small sticks and feeding them into the center until the flames returned. Their hands worked with practiced ease. No words at first, only the sound of wood breaking and fire catching. Then they began to speak, their voices carrying the rhythm of the morning, slower and calmer than the night before. The machine could not yet understand the meaning of their words, but it sensed no alarm, no urgency, only a shared purpose in preparing for the day ahead. As they worked, the older human paused and glanced toward the shadows where Observer 9 stood hidden. The glance was brief but steady. His gaze passed over the trees without lingering. Yet the machine recorded the moment as another anomaly. Was it possible that the human knew something was there, or was it simply a habit to scan the surroundings? The younger human followed his gaze for an instant before returning to the fire, speaking in a tone that suggested familiarity and trust. The humans prepared food, small pieces of dried meat and fruit taken from their packs. They placed them on a flat stone near the fire to warm. The scent drifted into the air, rich and strong. Observer 9 scanned the composition of the food from its position. Identifying proteins and sugars, plant oils and minerals, it compared the values to the bread it had taken the night before, different materials but the same purpose, to feed, to share energy. Yet again the act of sharing itself seemed important. They did not eat in silence or apart from each other. They passed pieces back and forth, each taking turns, each watching the other as they ate. After the meal, the younger human picked up a small tool and began working on something by the riverbank. Thin branches were tied together with strips of plant fiber, forming a kind of frame. The older human joined him, holding the frame steady while the younger tightened the bindings. The machine recorded the process, noting how their movements matched without needing many words, how each one seemed to know the next step the other would take. This cooperation was precise, but also natural, flowing without commands or ranks, different from the ordered teams of the council, where every action followed a rule. Hours passed as the humans continued their tasks, sometimes working side by side, sometimes apart, but always aware of each other. When one moved out of sight, the other would glance toward that direction from time to time, not in suspicion, but in quiet habit. Observer 9 noted this constant awareness, this thread of connection that seemed to guide them without the need for machines or signals. It was a kind of invisible link, and in its own way, it was stronger than any coded communication. In the afternoon, they set out from the camp, walking along the river path. The machine followed at a distance, adjusting its camouflage to blend with the moving shadows of the leaves. The humans spoke as they walked, their hands sometimes gesturing to the land around them, pointing to a bird in the trees, to a ripple in the water, to tracks in the soft soil. The machine recorded each point of interest. But what struck it most was how they moved together, adjusting pace so that neither fell behind, waiting without complaint when one stopped, and always scanning ahead and behind with the same quiet readiness. At one point, they came to a fallen tree blocking the path, the trunk thick and heavy. The younger human stepped forward and began to push, but it did not move. The older joined him, and together they shifted it just enough to pass, both breathing harder from the effort, both smiling faintly as they continued. The machine compared this to its data on other species, on worlds where one would leave the other to find another path. Here, the two faced the obstacle together without hesitation. This was not just survival, it was cooperation as a default instinct. Later, they stopped to rest, sitting on a large stone by the water. The older human pulled something from his pack, a small metal container. He opened it and poured a warm drink into 2 cups, handing one to the younger without looking. As if the action was automatic, the younger took it with the same ease, their hands moving in practice patterns that spoke of years of shared life. The machine recorded the exchange and noted how small acts repeated over time formed bonds that no calculation could easily measure. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, they returned to the camp. The older human carried a bundle of wood. The younger carried the frame they had built earlier, now covered with woven reeds to make a simple platform. The campfire was lit again, the scent of smoke rising into the cooling air. The humans worked together to set the frame near the fire, their voices low and steady, their movements unhurried. The machine watched as they turned the simple forest space into a place of warmth and safety without walls or shields, using only their hands, their tools, and their shared effort. When the night came, they sat by the fire again, this time with a larger meal. The older one told a story, his hands moving as he spoke. The younger listened with a half-smile, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes shaking his head. The machine recorded every word, though it still could not translate them. But the tone carried meaning enough. This was not planning, not strategy. This was connection, memory. An identity passed from one to the other, and in the glow of the flames, their bond seemed as real and solid as the fire itself. Observer 9's processors compared the day's events to the archives of the Council, to the worlds where survival meant obedience to a ruler, where cooperation was enforced by threat or command. Here it saw something else entirely, a kind of power that did not come from orders or fear, but from choice, from the decision to stand beside each other even when no one was watching. It was not the kind of strength the Council measured. Yet in the quiet of the forest, it seemed stronger than fleets or armies, a power built in the hearts of beings who trusted each other completely. The fire burned higher as the humans prepared to sleep. The older one placed extra wood nearby, so it would last through the night. The younger checked the riverbank for signs of the predator, then returned without worry. They lay down under the stars, the flames casting long shadows, and Observer 9 stood in the dark, its sensors sweeping the forest, its processors holding the day's images like fragments of something it did not yet have a word for, but which it knew was important, something it would have to bring back across the void, something the Council would not expect, a different kind of power. The night in the forest began quietly. The fire burned with a slow, steady glow. The air carried the soft sounds of insects and the gentle rush of the river. The humans lay on their blankets, speaking in low voices, their words flowing like water, sometimes broken by a soft laugh, sometimes falling into silence. Observer 9 stood in the shadows, its sensors spread wide. Every shift in the wind, every faint vibration in the ground, every whisper of sound was recorded and measured. Nothing in the darkness escaped its notice. Yet even as it tracked the forest, its processors kept returning to the events it had witnessed since arriving. The moments of calm and danger, the acts of sharing without reason, the bond between these two humans that needed no commands to guide it. Then a change came, first as a tremor in the ground so faint it might have been missed by human senses, but the machine felt it clearly, followed by a ripple through the air, a low growl in the distance. Heavier than the predator from before, slower but deeper. The humans sat up almost at the same moment, their eyes turning toward the trees. The older one reached for his stick again. The younger one rose to his feet, scanning the darkness. Their movements were quiet but sure. They did not speak. Yet each seemed to know what the other would do. The fire's glow lit their faces, showing focus without panic. From the shadows came shapes, not one but three, large animals with thick fur and long limbs. Their eyes catching the light in pale flashes, they moved in a slow arc around the camp, testing the edges, their muscles shifting under their skin like coils ready to strike. Observer 9 marked them as highly dangerous, their teeth and claws built for killing, their speed capable of overwhelming unarmed prey. It calculated the odds and found them heavily against the humans. Yet the humans did not run. The older one stepped forward slightly, placing himself between the animals and the younger. The younger began to gather stones from the ground, his hands moving quickly but calmly. The largest of the animals stepped closer, its breath visible in the cold night air, its head low, ears flat. The fire crackled as if urging the moment forward. Observer 9's defense protocols armed silently, ready to unleash the blinding flare. Yet again it held back, observing, recording. The humans shifted position, now standing side by side. The younger holding 2 stones, the older with his stick raised. Their bodies angled not away from the threat, but toward it, their eyes locked on the animals with an intensity the machine could not translate into numbers. The standoff lasted for long breaths. The animals paced slowly, their claws scraping the ground. Then one lunged forward in a sudden burst. The younger human hurled a stone with sharp precision, striking it on the side of the head. The animal staggered back with a growl. The older human stepped forward with a shout, swinging his stick through the air. The sound and movement made the other 2 hesitate. The fire's light flickered wildly over the scene, shadows leaping like more predators in the trees. The animals regrouped, pacing again, but now their movements were less certain. The humans did not chase them, did not retreat. They held their ground, ready for the next move, and after a long, tense moment, the animals began to back away, step by step, their eyes still locked on the humans until the trees swallowed them completely. The forest went still again except for the fire and the river. The humans lowered their weapons, breathing harder now, but with a quiet satisfaction in their faces. The younger one let out a small laugh. The older smiled briefly before turning back to the fire. Observer 9 processed the event, its logic arrays running the scenario again and again. The humans had faced a force that outnumbered and outmatched them in physical power, yet they had not relied on superior tools or overwhelming force. They had relied on each other, on coordination without words, on courage without armor. This was not just survival instinct. It was something more deliberate, a decision to stand in the path of danger, because retreat was not acceptable when the other was. Beside them, as the humans sat again by the fire, their bodies relaxed, but their eyes still scanning the darkness. The machine recognized something it had not calculated before. The danger to these humans was not less than to any other species, yet their ability to face it came from a source outside the usual measures of strength. They were not the largest, not the fastest, not the most heavily armed, but they had the will to protect each other, even when the odds made no sense. This will was unpredictable. And unpredictability in the face of danger was what made them dangerous to any enemy. The older human reached into his pack and pulled out a small cloth bag. He poured its contents into his hand, offering some to the younger, who took them with an easy motion. They ate quietly, still watching the forest. The machine recorded the act as another sign of their resilience. Even after a fight, they returned to sharing food as if it were part of the natural order, not an afterthought. This ability to return to calm so quickly was another anomaly in the records. It suggested a kind of mental strength that could not be shaken easily. The fire burned on, the night deepened, the humans eventually lay back again, one sleeping while the other remained half awake. Scanning the darkness in turns, Observer 9 remained still, its camouflage blending perfectly with the trees. Yet inside its systems there was a shift, a recognition that the danger it had seen tonight was not just in the predators. The greater danger was in what this meant for the Council. If two unarmed humans in the wild could repel a coordinated threat through nothing but will and unity, then what would a world of billions be capable of if united in purpose? The thought, if it could be called that, settled into its memory banks, tagged with the highest level of significance. The humans were not only different, they were a kind of variable that no algorithm could fully predict, and that truth, once brought back to the council, would change the way they saw this blue planet forever. The sun rose slowly through the mist that clung to the forest, pale light spilling across the trees and touching the river with silver. The fire from the night before had burned down to soft embers, sending thin trails of smoke into the cool air. The humans moved with quiet purpose, gathering their few belongings, checking their path, their eyes always scanning for danger. Though the forest seemed calm now, Observer 9 stood nearby, its systems recording every movement, yet its focus was no longer only on the environment. Much of its processing power was caught on a single question: what would happen when the council heard everything it had seen? The older human stretched his arms and shoulders, then pointed toward a narrow path winding through the trees. The younger nodded and started walking, carrying a small bundle. Their pace was steady, neither hurried nor slow, as if they had measured the day ahead and knew exactly how far they would go before rest. The machine followed without sound, moving in perfect rhythm with their steps. It was not designed to feel anticipation, but something like it moved through its circuits now, a kind of rising energy tied to the knowledge that its mission was almost complete and yet far more complicated than expected. The forest thinned after some time, the trees giving way to open ground covered with tall grass that swayed in the morning breeze. In the distance, low hills rolled toward the horizon, and beyond them a faint glimmer hinted at the presence of a larger body of water. The humans spoke a few words to each other, their tone casual, but their eyes alert, as if they knew that open ground brought its own kind of danger. Observer 9 scanned in all directions, detecting only small animals hiding in the grass, but its protocols insisted on caution. Wide spaces meant fewer places to hide if trouble came. They crossed the grassland in long strides, their shadows stretching behind them in the growing light. At the crest of one of the hills, the younger human stopped and pointed. In the distance, a thin column of smoke rose into the sky, darker than the soft haze from their campfire. This was the smoke of burning wood, and something else mixed in. The older human's expression tightened. He adjusted the grip on his stick and began moving faster. The younger followed without question, their steps lengthened, their bodies leaning forward. The machine increased speed to match them, curiosity rising in its logic streams. The smoke source lay directly on the route toward the location where its hidden craft waited. The smell reached them before the source came into view, sharp and bitter, a smell the machine's sensors classified as burnt fabric and charred organic matter. The humans came to a stop near the edge of another small valley. Below them lay a cluster of crude shelters, several already reduced to blackened frames, smoke still curling upward, no movement among the remains, no voices, no signs of life. The younger human took a step forward, but the older placed a hand on his shoulder, shaking his head slowly, then gestured toward a set of tracks in the dirt, many footprints, some small, some large, leading away toward the north. Observer 9 recorded everything, its internal analysis marking this as evidence of hostile contact. The destruction seemed deliberate, targeted to remove shelter and resources, yet could not confirm if the attackers were human or something else. The humans stood in silence for a long moment, their faces still but their eyes burning with something hard to measure. The older human finally turned and began leading them down into the valley. They moved among the ruins, stepping over broken wood and scattered belongings. The younger crouched to pick up a small carved figure, its edges blackened by fire. He held it for a moment before placing it gently on a fallen beam. The machine's processors worked to connect this scene with the wider data it had gathered. The physical threat was clear, but there was more here, an unseen weight pressing on the humans that was not from fear alone. It was the loss of something important, not to themselves alone, but to others, a shared pain. And even without words, it could feel the way it bound them tighter, as if the damage to this place became fuel for their resolve. This was not retreat. This was the kind of wound that made humans move forward with more strength than before. The older human pointed toward the north, toward where the tracks led, his voice low but certain. The younger nodded, and without further discussion they began to follow the trail. Observer 9 hesitated for the first time in its mission. The craft that would take it back to the council lay to the east, not the north, yet the machine turned and followed them, its logic noting the deviation but not correcting it. As if something beyond its programmed priorities had taken hold, this choice would delay its return. It did not override the decision. Perhaps the data from the north would be even more important than anything it had so far. The trail led them through another stretch of forest, denser now, the air cooler and shadows thicker. The sound of running water grew louder until they reached a narrow stream. The tracks crossed here and continued on the other side. The humans drank briefly, then pressed on. The machine's sensors caught faint heat signatures ahead, moving slowly, spread apart in irregular patterns. The humans must have sensed it too because their pace changed. Steps lighter, movements more deliberate. They crouched low as they approached a small clearing. In the clearing stood figures, not like the humans, taller and thinner, their skin pale with a faint blue sheen, their clothes made of layered strips of some tough material. In their hands they carried tools or weapons. It was hard to tell. The humans froze just inside the trees, watching. The machine recorded every detail, matching these figures against the council's archives and finding no exact match. Unknown origin, unknown threat level. The figures were speaking in low voices, their heads turning now and then as if checking for danger, but their posture was relaxed, confident. The older human whispered to the younger, the words too low for the machine to catch. Then they began to move, circling the clearing, keeping to the shadows. Observer 9 followed, its silent movement matching theirs. The machine's processors ran simulations of possible outcomes. The risk level was high, yet the humans pressed on. They were not turning back, they were closing in. And somewhere deep in its data cores, the machine knew that whatever happened next would not only decide the end of its mission, but might also change the way the council saw this species forever. The clearing was silent except for the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. The pale, blue-skinned figures continued speaking in low tones. Unaware that in the shadows, 3 watchers observed them with different hearts and different purposes. The older human's eyes were sharp like blades ready to cut through any threat. The younger's breathing was steady though his hands gripped his bundle tighter. And the machine known as Observer 9 recorded every shift of light, every motion of muscle, every strange glimmer in the weapons or tools the unknown beings carried. Deep in its processors, a single directive repeated like a drumbeat: protect the data at all costs and deliver it to the Galactic Council. The humans moved slowly, their feet silent on the soft forest floor, circling the group in a wide arc. The machine followed without sound, every calculation warning that engagement carried a high chance of destruction. Yet the humans showed no hesitation. As they closed the arc, the older man gave a brief hand signal. The younger nodded and began moving toward a position behind a thick fallen tree. The older crouched behind a cluster of bushes. The machine stopped between them, unsure whether to remain hidden or act if violence began. The decision weighed heavily. Its programming did not fully cover this kind of situation where both observation and survival were in direct conflict. Suddenly, one of the blue-skinned figures tilted its head, eyes narrowing, its strange voice cutting through the clearing like a sharp crack. The others turned instantly, scanning the edges of the space. The humans froze in place, their bodies melting into the cover of leaves and bark. The machine reduced its power output to lower the heat signature. Still, the figures began moving toward the treeline, weapons now raised, their long limbs making each step glide like a predator's approach. The older human's hand tightened on the wooden shaft he carried, his knuckles pale, his breath slow, his gaze fixed on the lead figure's chest, as if calculating something precise. The moment broke when a younger human hurled a small object across the clearing. It struck a rock with a metallic clang and rolled away, drawing the attention of 2 of the figures who moved after it. The older human used the distraction to slip forward, closing the distance in a crouched run. The machine followed without conscious thought, drawn by the urgency that seemed to pulse from the humans like a signal it could almost translate. The lead figure saw movement too late. The older human was upon it, swinging the stick upward into its weapon hand. The blow landed with a thud that echoed like a heartbeat. The weapon clattered to the ground. The figure stumbled back, and then chaos filled the clearing. The younger human emerged from cover, rushing another figure, using his body weight to knock it off balance. The machine moved quickly, extending its manipulator arm to grab the fallen weapon, its scanners running over the device in a fraction of a second. The energy signature was dangerous. It could cut through metal with ease. The machine turned the weapon toward a third figure advancing from the far side of the clearing, not firing, but holding the aim steady, forcing the figure to slow. The air was thick with the sound of feet pounding the earth, the hiss of strange voices, the crash of bodies against bodies. The humans fought with a ferocity that the machine could not categorize as logic or reflex alone. It was something deeper, something that made each strike and each dodge flow together without hesitation. One of the blue-skinned beings broke away from the fight and began running north, perhaps to bring others. The machine's targeting sensors locked onto it, calculations running through whether to use the weapon or pursue. Before it could decide, the older human shouted a word, the tone sharp like a command. The machine shifted instantly, dashing after the fleeing figure, its servos driving its body faster than human legs could follow. The forest blurred around it, the target ahead weaving between trees, glancing back with eyes wide. The machine closed the gap and leapt forward, colliding with the figure, both crashing to the ground, the weapon skittering away into the undergrowth. The figure hissed, clawing at the machine, but metal plates resisted the strikes. The machine's arm locked around the figure's limb, sensors recording every detail of the skin texture, the faint bioluminescent glow, the heat from the struggling muscles. A message flashed across its core systems. Transmission priority critical. The data it had gathered was now beyond valuable. It was essential. The council had to receive it. The machine released the figure suddenly, springing back and vanishing into the shadows, leaving the stunned being behind. Every calculation now focused on reaching the hidden craft. Back at the clearing, the humans were pulling back, their attacks measured now to create space rather than overpower. The older man caught sight of the machine as it emerged from the trees. He nodded once, a signal without words that carried weight. Together they moved east, slipping away into the forest while the remaining figures regrouped, their voices rising in a strange rhythmic chant that followed the humans and machine through the trees. The sound was like a warning carried on the wind. Hours passed in tense silence as they traveled, the sky dimming toward evening, the air cooler. The machine's navigation aligned them toward the small valley where its craft lay hidden under camouflage netting. At last the slope opened into a narrow hollow, and there it was, untouched, its silver surface reflecting the fading light in brief flashes between the leaves. The machine stepped forward, its systems already initiating pre-launch checks. But it turned to look at the humans one more time. The older man stood with arms folded, his face unreadable. The younger watched quietly, eyes curious, perhaps wondering if they would ever meet again. The machine raised its manipulator arm in what might almost have been a farewell, then moved to the craft, the hatch opening with a soft hiss, the interior lighting spilling out in warm gold. It stepped inside, systems locking into their stations. The hatch closed, and engines began to hum low and steady. Through the small viewport, the humans grew smaller as the craft rose, the trees falling away beneath, clouds sliding past. And then the curve of the planet filled the view, a sight that even the machine could not process without a sense of scale that felt close to awe. Data transmission began the moment it cleared the atmosphere, beams of compressed information racing toward the Galactic Council's listening posts. Every image, every sound, every scent reading, every emotional interaction recorded in microscopic detail, woven into a report that could not be ignored. And at the end of that report, a single line of machine language translated for the Council's records as one clear warning. Humans are not what you think they are. They are more, much more, and if You come for them. You will not be ready.